Este fin de semana se entregaron los Globos de Oro. Minari fue una de las grandes ganadoras. Se quedó con la categoría a Mejor Película Extranjera o Mejor Película de Habla No Inglesa. Y conversé con su director de fotografía, con Lachlan Milne, que me habló de cuál fue la búsqueda que tuvieron en este proyecto tan personal para su director, para Lee Isaac Chung, que, a ver, si bien no es un documental, trajo muchas de sus vivencias personales a esta historia y justamente esto influyó en el peso emotivo que tuvo este rodaje. De un montón de cosas así hablamos, así como también de qué significa esencialmente Minari, cuál es el mensaje que esta película, todo esto en este informe sobre una de las películas más lindas que nos dejó el 2020.
We now return to Mira Akien and Contre with our latest interview.
I loved everything about the story from the get-go. I loved the simplicity of it, but underneath that, there's a lot of individual complexity between the characters. Everybody's got their own interpretation of what's happening in their own inner struggle, which I really loved. But globally, I loved the message of the film.
여기 대체 어디야?
집이지. 새로 시작한다고 그랬잖아.
I remember speaking to him about the tone, about what the tone of the film was that he wanted to make, because like you say, it's very personal for him. And a lot of it happened to him. There's also a bit of creative license in it. It's not a documentary, this film.
Yeah.
But there are definitely specific moments throughout the film that he's pulling from his personal experience. But no, we still wanted it to be a film in the sense that it's not solely truth oriented and solely based on everything that he went through. So there's a little bit of creative license from times, but we talked about, do you want it to feel like a series of memories or snapshots? Is that something that you want to encapsulate? But within that, there's I don't know how much you remember about being a 6 or a 7-year-old, but I remember smells or sounds or curtains or something. You remember like bits of it. You don't remember this person walked in and then they said this and then this happened. You get like an impression of what it was, but there's kind of like a cloudiness to it, and so we kind of tried to incorporate that into how we did the film as well.
If you're here with us for the first time, please stand. What a beautiful family. Glad you're here.
It was a very modest budget film. But I come from independent films. I've done really big stuff, and I've done lovely intimate stuff like this that and there are great things about both of them. And you just adapt your methodology and your filmmaking approach to accommodate the budget restraints that every project has. Like the biggest enemy of the filmmaker is time and money. I think the best version of this film was the $2 million version, not the $20 million version. I think that would have become a very different project. And I think it would have lost a lot of the intimacy and kind of honesty of the film that we were really struggling to hold on to. And we felt like that's the crux of the story. And that was the most important thing. It was just a single camera shoot. I operated because I love operating, and I love being the closest to the actors. And then I can make decisions quickly on the set. If I want to move the camera or not, or change a lens or something, it can all happen very quickly. So we were lucky to get like a really like-minded group of people, because there were a lot of difficult days and a lot of limitations, but everybody who does a film of this scale does it for the right reasons, if that makes sense. Everybody's doing it because they believe in the project and they want to do the best version of that. And so as long as you've got people like that in your corner, you run yourself a pretty good chance of succeeding. Particularly from a production design things, there was a lot of consideration, because so much of the cast and also the crew, a lot of people behind the scenes were South Korean. So there was real authenticity to the production design and the performances and the tone of the characters, because these people have lived through those periods in their own individual lives as well. From a performance side of things, I know, speaking to YJ and to Yeri and to Stephen, there was a lot of significance for them from a character side of things, because it was just this complete, envelopment in this world that became real to them.
How's your daddy like that new farm? He growing things good, doing things right?
Yes.
He's a wonderful boy. I like him a lot. I haven't seen him obviously since the film, but he's such a charming kid. And he's phenomenal in that film. And to be honest with you, it's like, you got to remember that he's in almost every scene in the movie. So you think about it just from a workload of a young kid, it's remarkable. And we're all saying it, Stephen and Isaac and, the rest of the family and the crew, all of us were saying he just got better as the film went on. which for such a young kid who hasn't really done very much was I mean, remarkable. I mean, to his credit, I think he does a fantastic job. He's really impressive.
Yeah.
You know, he turned up, he'd know his lines, he would take instructions. It was hot. It was the middle of July in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So it's like in the 90s every day. And we were in a caravan, we're all crammed into this tiny caravan that had no windows, and we'd like try to pump as much air conditioning in there, but it would get hot. And, you know, the first thing you do when you get hot is you start to get a bit tired, especially when you're a kid. So, and he fought through that. He did incredibly well. Yeah. He's a real shining light in the film, isn't he? He's fantastic.
미국 애들은 할머니랑 같이 방 쓰는 거 싫어한다던데.
I don't like grandma.
쟤는 안 그래요. 한국애니까.
Grandma smells like Korea.
What about the stroke scene? I think it did this. You mentioned this, that this was like an actual event on the director's life. How intense was to shot that? Because I think at the beginning, I thought at the beginning that she was dead. And then I realized, and then you carry on like 20 or 30 minutes with that story of her having like going on with her life after a stroke. How intense was all that?
That was very emotional for everybody, but particularly for Isaac, because that happened to him. So that was I remember, because I was operating and he was just with a little handheld monitor right next to me, just over my right hand shoulder. And it was very tough for him because he'd obviously loved his grandmother so much, and she's the inspiration behind this film. And so he is essentially reenacting one of the really traumatic experiences from his childhood. So that was very tough for him. And we're all very aware of that because, you know, he's such a lovely person and we're all there for him, you know, to make sure that, you know, everybody does justice to the project. But particularly that scene. The other one too was the scene that happens the night before. I think it's the night before in the story where David gets into bed with Sunja. He remembers that was on par with the same level of emotion for him, I think, because he remembers being comforted by his grandmother, and then obviously tragedy strikes. And so the combination of those two scenes was tough for him. But, you know, it's so important to the story because, again, it's just like another highlight that it doesn't really matter. Like, the family is always the most important thing, right? It's always the most important thing, regardless of what everybody goes through. And yet another tragedy is not enough to be able to force these people apart. You know, there's so much adversity that they're confronted with throughout the film, and that's just another piece of it. But the end result is that as long as you stay together, only good things will come of it. Part of the reason why I really wanted to go wide there's two reasons. The first one, where I wanted to go wide when we're outside, is to give the film some scale and to open the film up, because so much of it happens with dialogue inside the trailer. So there's a chance to have some scale for everybody to take a bit of a visual breath from the sort of the intensity of some of the dialogue in there. So for the audience to be able to have a bit of a reprieve, but also to show the insurmountable task that this man had set upon himself, which is to try and, you know, tame, for want of a better word, this incredibly vast landscape essentially on his own. Like, he ends up recruiting one other person to help him out, but just the scale of the project that he had undertaken, I wanted the audience to be able to see how kind of impossible that felt like, if that makes sense. So to your point, if you put somebody small in a big empty landscape, where their sole purpose is to start to irrigate it or farm it to produce, you know, vegetables to be able to support their family, to be able to have to do all that on your own looks too overwhelming. So that was another thing that we really wanted to do in the film. The fire is real, absolutely. Yeah, it was an area of contention, and initially it's like there's always one scene in every film where everybody talks about it because it's either difficult or it's going to be expensive or it's going to take too long or it's impossible or whatever. And so our version of that scene in Minari was the barn fire, because initially it was talked about in a visual effects enhancement kind of a way. But myself and Isaac were really nervous about trying to rely solely on VFX for what is the emotional climax of the film.
Yeah.
And the expectation from an audience is so great. And you know, you got to remember, you're watching these two people's entire livelihood, the last months or years or whatever it is that they've invested into this new life, go up in flames. And so it has to be significant, and it has to be tragic in a sense of loss. And so I really pushed hard to do it in camera, because I've done a lot of VFX work, and it's fantastic. But I feel like, particularly in the best version of that was going to be to do it for real. It was real Minari at the end, at the very end of the film. That was actual Minari that we put in that creek, and the art department went in there maybe a week before or so and planted it so that it felt a little bit more integrated into the landscape by the time it came around to shooting, rather than just, you know, pull it out of a pot and put it there and it just clearly looks like that's what you've done, you know. So, but no, it's really quintessential to Korean life. It's used in food, obviously, in medicine, and it's kind of like the cornerstone of almost every meal. And if you've ever had anything like kimchi or had any Korean meal, there's a really good chance that you've had it. So the idea of it, it's a waterborne vegetable, and it's very resilient. So that's the metaphor as well, and the significance of the vegetable to the story. It thrives in hostile environments.